My topic today is pretty much in sync with the theme that we have. That's ideate, recreate. And I thought, how could it get anything any better than speaking about the power of ideas and how ideas can sometimes create innovations and how those innovations end up solving complex problems that we always face. Anybody can ideate. Of course, you're going to ask for some evidence. So I'll try and show you a structure of how you can actually ideate on some of the most complex problems and put it into action. So many of you may be able to guess about this, but it's something that we encountered in person, most of us, especially in the last couple of years. Edward Jenner is actually considered the founder or the father of immunology or vaccinology in the West in 1796. What is important is that he actually inoculated a boy with something called as a vaccinia virus. Now, vaccine or vaccinia is a word which actually comes from a cow. And what he did was he inoculated the boy with cowpox and demonstrated immunity to one of the most lethal diseases in the world called smallpox. Now, what we experienced during COVID 19 in terms of the immunization program, you can actually credit it to the immunization that actually got really kick-started with the idea of eradicating smallpox. But many of you may not actually know that smallpox is the only disease which has got eradicated completely from the face of Earth. All the others still continue to exist. And it was one of those diseases that at a point in time was killing 1 out of every 3 persons who actually got infected. Or some form of research shows that this disease has existed for thousands of years on the face of Earth. But the interesting thing is it actually got eradicated just in 1980, very, very recently, just about 50 years ago. And the roots of that eradication actually got created in 1796, as you may think. But what you see here is a timeline only of the modern version of vaccination. And vaccination itself was not the big idea that I'm talking about. If you look at the modern version of vaccination, all the way from 1790s to 2020, when the COVID vaccines got created, you can safely say that it has been a story of ideate and recreate. It has constantly got recreated in new versions, safer versions of what we consume today. At a time and space which we guess is in China, and not really Jenner's idea, who's known as the father of immunology. So who exactly was this completely eccentric and extraordinary man, probably uneducated, who invented immunology, not really knowing he was doing that, with one of the greatest ideas and the boldest experiments in medical history? So people say, or stories say, that he was a healer, a traveler, someone who believed in the practices outside the contemporary Chinese medicines, and according to biochemist historian Joseph Needham. Now, I want you to connect the dots for a while, and this is going to help you really appreciate how ideas get created. It doesn't matter who X was, but if X was aware, if X was just aware of a few connecting dots, person to person transmission, I can know it just by observing people, I don't need to be a scientist. Knew a person could only be infected once, I think it was possible to see with smallpox. Anybody who survived basically got immunized for life. Knew a child would almost inevitably contract the disease naturally. Okay, that was interesting. Believed in the efficacy of poisonous medications. So by the way, have you heard of this old theory of poison kills poison, or poison can cure poison, or set a thief to catch a thief? All of these theories actually innovate from China. So he really believed in the efficacy of poisonous medications and had a strong preference for preventive care. If you see, most of the Western medicine has been about curative care. But the Asian medicines, the Chinese or the Indian medicines, have always been about preventive care. If you're able to put a connect with the dots on these 5 or 6 points, as a keen observer, you actually have a very good possibility of also coming out with the idea of inoculation. And if you see, none of these had anything to do with a very detailed study of how vaccines are created. So, what was the basic idea behind vaccination? It was all about inducing protection against a pathogen by mimicking its natural interaction with the human immune system. So, you intentionally infect a healthy person, but with a weakened pathogen if you want to create immunity. And yet, the idea to actually intentionally infect a patient, it occurred to someone who was nothing to do with, who has absolutely nothing to do with the medicine industry, is actually quite fascinating. And it happens to be, by the way, the greatest idea in the history of medicine. It can seem surprising to you that how can one of the medicine's most ingenious inspirations arise in someone who has absolutely no belief in scientific-based medicine? Maybe it could have only been tried by what I call as an observant believer. I want you to pay attention to these two words. Observant believer. Just pure observation is not good enough. You have to be a believer that I'm observing a set of patterns and I think they connect to form a dot, and all these dots connect together to form an idea, and I can believe in it, right? And then I can tell a great story. Just to share with you, this person X also had incentives for not disclosing who he was, because if he was a person like you and me, people would not believe him. So this person X actually became a mystery, that he came from the gods and he did something magical, right? But it was really a human being. What I want to point out too is the core idea that absolutely anyone can ideate and play a role in solving the most complex problems around us, which very often keep us worried. So coming to the final part of my presentation today, how can you actually put your ideating talent to use? Is there a formula? Or is it just purely from hunch? Can ideation be a logical process? Can it be taught? Can it be practiced? Is it really possible to generate a worthy idea deliberately? Or is it like you just wake up one day and the apple falls on your head and you finally discover gravity? So let's get a bit deeper into this. So I decided to put together a 5-step process to ideate. Why 5? Because 5 is easy to remember. No other logic. I know 3 is better, but I had 2 more points, so made it 5. The first thing you need to do is to be inspired to actually solve a problem. For you to become a keen observer of what's going around you, you need a trigger. You need an inspiration. You need to care about a problem. You need to feel hurt, which might inspire you to actually solve a problem. If you can do that, you can become a keen observer. You start observing the causes. But here is a word of caution. You have to be prepared to look beneath the causes, because the causes sometimes can wrap around the real causes. Once you start observing the causes, you start connecting the thoughts to form patterns to see if they actually make sense. And then there's a very interesting phrase here: peel till you feel. Peel till you feel. So you got all these patterns, you want them to make sense, but then you need to keep peeling, just like you peel an onion, until you get to the core, to really experience what is the core, what lies at the core, which basically holds the secret key to an idea that can actually solve a complex problem once and for all. So, of course, I'm not going to leave you with an algorithm without an example. So let me share a little live example of something that I'm currently working on, trying to solve a fairly sticky problem, not as big as smallpox, but I think still fairly significant to a lot of people. Using this 5-step process to ideate, that India is actually the worst performing country in terms of people losing lives in road accidents. Every year, anywhere between 150 to 200,000 people die on roads because of road accidents. Completely avoidable. And some of the fatal ones, as I mentioned, are happening on highways, which involve trucks that actually ship goods. Now, my team and I were given a task, a very fascinating one, I must say, by a large goods transportation company with bringing fatal accidents to zero on their network, okay, at least on their network, and then maybe something that can be replicated on other networks. So very clearly, we have an inspiring problem to solve. Globally, this problem is called as Vision Zero. It doesn't mean zero accidents, it just means zero fatal accidents. Basically, nobody should die on the road, right? Fairly inspiring. Observe its causes keenly as a keen observer. When we started observing a bit more closely, and after studying a lot of data, we realized that most of these accidents were happening due to a couple of causes. Either it was overspeeding, bad quality roads, poor visibility, rainy weather, very often overloaded trucks, basically loaded inappropriately for the use case. Either it could be due to a tire bust. And of course, on Indian roads, sometimes we have situations where someone or some animal can come in front of the truck unannounced. It's not funny, but it can happen, and it happens all the time. When you have so many reasons, you sometimes wonder where to start, right? Remember, I told you in step number 2, you observe the causes keenly, but at the same time, be very cautious that you don't get stuck on the causes because there's something lying beneath the causes. So we started to connect the thoughts to form patterns. One common pattern that we found was, obviously, there is a driver behind the wheels who couldn't control his truck well in time to avoid the accident. So essentially, things which are totally out of your control. Bad weather, a tire gets busted, somebody comes in front of you, completely beyond your control. A bad road, lots of potholes, you lose control. Somebody else is driving rashly and you're trying to save this person and you roll over, things which are beyond your control. So we realized that there is this driver who's behind the wheel, and it's actually he because there are no she drivers in India at the moment, who can't control his truck well in time to avoid the accident. As a result, either he passes away, so it's a fatal accident, or he's fatally injured, seriously injured, becomes disabled, or he ends up killing somebody. In each case, it's a fatal accident and a big impediment to Vision Zero. So, step 4 was peel till you start to feel. So, when we started peeling further, it was discovered that the driver wasn't alert enough. On peeling further, it appeared he hadn't slept well for days. I don't know if you're aware, but many truck drivers drive for 20 hours at a stretch. And sometimes they consume what you call as medicines. They pop pills to stay awake. You know what kind of pills these are. But that doesn't mean that they are alert. They're just awake. Their eyes are popped up, but they're not alert. And on peeling further, it appeared that his KRAs, key result areas, as we're all familiar, were all about ensuring the truck reached its destination on or before the due date. A lot of pressure from the company who wants to ship, a lot of pressure from the fleet owner who wants to make sure that his truck is reaching on time. And he was constantly pressurized to do that, as not doing it would imply that he wasn't doing his job well. Now, he could be fired in the worst of cases, could be penalized, or not given his incentive. Please remember, they don't get paid too well. So if there is this attraction of an incentive, if you reach your destination 1 or 2 days before the due date, I think it's fascinating. To pop the pill, stay alert, and test your luck. Right? So that's what he was doing. So when we peeled till we realized the underlying causes were something else. So, what lies at the core? What emerged as the big idea to solve this sticky problem of fatal accidents was to simply ensure that the driver got sufficient rest and sleep and that he was fit to drive before he got behind the wheels. Sounds like a complex solution? Not really. But the motivations don't stack up. He's not motivated to rest and sleep. But at least now we know why most of these fatal accidents are actually happening. So, once a solution is identified, you can start collecting evidence to validate or invalidate your hypothesis. That's what researchers do really well. And it's all about then identifying ways and means to actually make it happen. So once we figure out that this is what we need to solve, it was so much easier for us to rope in experts. Remember Dr. Jenner? He's just an expert. Somebody gets the idea, but somebody else works on it. So be okay with it. You don't have to take your idea to deathbed. You can ideate, innovate, but you can let somebody else recreate and recreate into a better form with each passing year. If smallpox took 500 years after the first inoculation to get completely eradicated from the face of Earth, this can take at least a couple of years. Not one person is going to solve it fully, but if we have a lot of people working together to solve this problem of creating and recreating the possibility of providing sufficient rest to Indian truck drivers using better technology, better training, better incentives, better SOPs, we might actually be able to save people from dying on the Indian highways. Thank you very much.